Hello, welcome to the third and last webinar of a series of 3 webinars offered as part of the World University Network funded Research Methodologies in Education project, or ReMiE project for short. My name is Lisa Kim and I'm the principal investigator of the project and the host for the webinar series. Today's topic is on technological innovations and opportunities in educational research. And the presentations will be delivered by Professor Dick Nambi from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And the second presentation will be delivered by Dr. Nora McIntyre from the University of Southampton in the UK. A few practicalities: please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen throughout the session to post your questions, and we'll address them at the end of the session. While Dick prepares to join us on the virtual stage, I'll read out his online profile for us. So Dick Nambi is a full professor of education technology and head of educational technology programs in the School of Education at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. He's a founder and project director of the Educational Technology Inquiry Lab, a digital sandpit for learning technology uses through play. His work at the lab investigates how culture of innovation are created and how creativity is unleashed in education. He has served as a principal investigator and co-investigator on several projects, including the LEGO-funded project on children, play and technology in collaboration with the University of Sheffield in the UK. He's currently leading a project on open educational resource of Indigenous games in Africa, involving 11 African countries. Thank you, Dick. Over to you.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and I do appreciate that. I'm sure you can be able to see my slides. So I just want to speak about the technological innovations and the opportunities that the educational research is availed to as a result of these technological innovations. And what I'll try and do is to start with this African proverb, because it's quite profound. The African proverb goes that do not test the depth of a river with both feet. And of course, you would almost understand why that is the reason for that. There's a lot of wisdom in the whole thinking that when you want to know how deep the river is, it's not time for you to put both your feet in there. This proverb does actually speak to how we look at the innovations, and also how we begin to put one foot forward in the testing of these innovations. And once you have tested the ground or the depth of the water, you put your both feet in and test the depth of the other part of the river with one foot. And by so doing, you are able to keep moving. So if you should be able to find ways in which one moves, even with that whole process of testing the depth and making some kind of progressive movements forward. The other thing that is useful for me to start with is to talk about this kind of work that was reported by Cronky just about this year from the Afrobarometer kind of data. What the Afrobarometer do is that they collect data, and they collected data from 34 African countries, and particularly they were looking at the digital literacy index, where they compare these very interesting metrics that comes out here. If you look at the red there, which actually speaks to the lack of readiness in terms of the digital literacy. And also when you look at does not own mobile phone or computer, does not use phone or internet, just about 9%. Owns a phone, no internet, does not use phone or internet regularly, it's about that. This box here actually shows that there is no readiness at all in terms of the digital readiness to use technology or even remote learning, particularly when one reflects on where we've just come from in terms of the pandemic. Here, we actually see on the smartphone or computer does not use phone or internet regularly. It actually does make lots of common sense if you look at that. If one owns phone, no internet access, uses phone or internet regularly, it's about 37%, which is quite high. But these are people that are using the phone or internet regularly, but they don't own phone or the internet access, which actually means that their use of the phone and internet regularly is a very expensive kind of process. The interesting part is that only this about 17% where they own a smartphone and the computer, and that they use the phone and internet regularly, which is a very small percentage if one thinks about it. The other thing that we begin to see here is the kind of what they refer to as the digital hubs readiness in across the 34 countries. And you actually see that the way this kind of data was put together is that they looked at these countries and looking at whether they have these greens, they do have a building and electricity and the cell phone service, and that these ones here, they do have the building with at least one component of that, of one component of either the electricity and the cell phone service. And then these ones here, they do not actually have anything, so to speak. And when with this data was also compared with the rural digital hubs, and they looked at the way these countries are positioned in terms of where people could actually have access to the internet or even electricity or the cell phone service, which actually begins to show that if one is to look at the use of innovativeness and use of technologies and the diffusion of technology, it must be seen in the context of the readiness. The digital kind of hub index does show us where these countries are positioned in terms of their readiness to use a technology, and also their readiness to provide access to the internet and also to the mobile network. One of the things that I actually saw from in Mozambique, for example, they created a digital hub under a tree. So this is a Wi-Fi tree that you're looking at. What they did was that they provided Wi-Fi under this tree, and they put electricity in this on this tree so that it was well lit, and that the students would then have access to this Wi-Fi tree 24/7, and that was quite useful to provide the whole idea of thinking about the digital hub. Using means that, and I actually thought this is very innovative, because what they've done there is to provide the Wi-Fi in a way that they're not necessarily waiting to have access to the building with electricity and also having the Wi-Fi and the cell phone signal. There was cell phone signal here. They provided the Wi-Fi under the tree. They allowed a lot of students to access this tree 24/7, and that was quite useful to note there. When in the intro, ETLAM was actually mentioned there. ETLAM is an initiative that I was privileged to found, which is a lab, Education Technology Inquiry Lab. What we do at the ETLAB is that it aims to provide teachers with a space where they leave the stresses normally associated with emerging technologies at the door, and enter with the goal of enjoyment and fun, where learning is with others and knowledge is freely shared, like the sand in the sandpit. What we do at the ETLAB is to create learning through collaborative engagements, learning from one another, and allowing the learning processes be captured as very useful, tangible evidence of learning. And I'll talk to you just about why this is important, because some of the technological innovations that were not possible just about 10 years ago have now been made possible for us. And I'll just be able to show how we have appropriated that here in the 8 lab. These are teachers, these are pre-service teachers, training and being made ready to actually go out there in the field meaning in schools. What we have actually done with these students, that each year these students create an e-portfolio, which is an evidence of their learning, the evidence of learning to become teachers. And these portfolios are put together in a way that the learning and play in the sandpit is through fun, as you can be able to see on the screen there. Here, the students were just being shown how the Jamboard works, and the first thing they do is that they just scribble on the Jamboard, they just learn how to scribble on the frame. They just learn how to uncover all these different affordances of it, and then once they have done that, that is when they actually begin looking at how they can apply this meaningfully. And what we have actually done over time is that over 2,000 e-portfolios have been created by each and every one of the pre-service teachers. So the pre-service teachers, each one creates an e-portfolio from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, which then they carry with to the field as evidence of the digital readiness. And these are just examples of what these students have actually created as e-portfolios. We have actually, a student of mine and myself, we created a framework called a teaching chain frame. This teaching chain frame is based on the 2 axes there. On one level, in this axis here is all about the awareness and access to technology. And then this one here is about the pedagogy, where if you look at Bloom's taxonomy, when we flipped Bloom's taxonomy and we looked at the teacher-centric methods of teaching, and then learner-centric methods of learning. And then we looked at these different kinds of quadrants, where we have in quadrant A, where one is actually, it's very teacher-centric and no technology in use. This is learner-centric, no technology. This is teacher-centric, but the technology is in the hands of the teacher. And here is very learner-centric, and the technologies are in the hands of the learner. And and this framework that we put together was appropriated by the Department of Basic Education, which and they put together a professional development framework for digital learning, which has been rolled out nationwide. What they've done with this framework is that they have this box here called teaching, where this is the traditional methods of teaching, where they are teaching with chalk and talk. No technology is in use because, so teacher-centric, moving from teacher-centric to learner-centric. This is learning where there's no technology's use, but it's very learner-centric. Technology here is in the hands of the teacher, technology is in the hands of the learner. And the awareness and use of digital tools and resources is what you see determining this. Here there's less awareness, high levels of awareness. We've actually used this to actually look at how the diffusion of innovation, if you look at the diffusion, the low diffusion of technology here and high diffusion of technology, and we see regulated, institutional controlled, and personal, which is cloud-based. We see here that in the paper that we did just about 2016, we looked at how the technology has diffused in the country, in South Africa, in the last 20 years. And we actually saw that we have moved from this quadrant towards this quadrant here, which is the digital literacies and social media, flexible learning. And that the pandemic, this is what the pandemic did. It actually accelerated the shift from these quadrants here, where there's no use of technology, to these quadrants here, where there is high use, but the teacher is actually using technology. And then this one here, where the learners are the ones that are using technology. The way this has actually played out is that here we have time, space, and distance, because you must be in the same space, you must be in the same time. And here, of course, you don't have to be, because you can be anywhere, but students need to have access to the technology to actually listen or browse or listen to what the teacher is actually disseminating there. What we have actually seen that in the recent past, that the use of things like LMSs and PowerPoints and videos and things like that, they tend to be in the hands of the teacher. And that when devices and tools have actually moved in the hands of the learner or in the hands of students, we've seen knowledge sharing, we've seen collaboration, we've seen co-production of knowledge emerging in this quadrant. What we actually, every year, I do create an activity for these students towards the end of the year. Why do you teach better? Why do you think you teach better? A very reflective task. And students have responded to that task, and technology has actually made that possible. And we have used the Flipgrid to actually do that. And over time, you know, when one looks at the way students have actually used Flipgrid to just collaboratively share a response to why they teach better, just before they leave to go to the field to go and teach, it has been quite amazing to actually look at the way technology has facilitated and enabled the collaborative engagement of students, where they actually move from just being able to learn in isolation to being able to reflect and allow their reflections to be heard and to be engaged with by other students. We have actually seen that just creating 2 tasks using Flipgrid for these students this year, there were only 2 topics that were created: why I teach better and why I chose teaching. And for 160 students, we have had 274 videos created and 3,300 views, which has actually totaled about 128 hours. So students have created these resources and they're able to engage with these resources. And technological innovation, this is an exploitation of the affordances of technology, which has actually made it possible for us to actually do this. And when one thinks about the 21st century skills, and oftentimes we've seen the disparity between what teachers feel that they must be able to engage students with and what students themselves engage with in terms of the technology. I asked the students to tell me about some of the apps they use for communication and for collaboration and for creativity and for critical thinking. And I was amazed at the number of apps that students were actually using. And students were busy using different kinds of tools for critical thinking, for the 21st century skills, and which actually began to confirm that there is a good shift towards that quadrant where technology is increasingly in the hands of the students, which is actually students are having access to the smartphones and different kinds of tools, and they are gravitating towards there. And I think there are lots of opportunities that allows us to begin looking at how do we understand what we can be able to do in terms of effective uses of technologies when evidence is actually showing that there's a gravitation towards this quadrant here, which is the digital learning quadrant. And this time, at this point, I'm actually leading this project, the Open Education Resources of Indigenous Games in Africa. And what we're really trying to do here is that the Indigenous Games are becoming obsolete. And they're becoming obsolete because they're becoming extinct. They are not being handed down by the parents to their children, because their children, either the parents are too busy or their children are not necessarily interested in indigenous games. What we're actually doing is that we are collecting and documenting indigenous games from across the continent. And what we have done so far is that we want to be able to ensure that indigenous games that are played in Southern Africa, they can be played in Central Africa, and the ones that are played in North Africa, they can be played in East Africa, and so on. What we're also doing with this project is that we want young people to learn how to code, to design digital indigenous games. And to date, we have collected about 150 games, and this is the kind of distribution of the games that we've collected from 10 countries in Africa. And I should just be able to mention that, I know I'm running out of time now, but some of the things that we're really looking at are things to do with the fact that a number of people, particularly in Africa, very communal, and that we know that being able to speak, it comes very naturally, as opposed to being able to type text. And typing text is not a normal kind of process, as opposed to being able to use voice, and this and the use of a Google Assistant, and just being able to speak to that. I mean, it's one of those that we're really exploring at the moment. Just being able to say, "Hey Google," and once we're trying to really design something that would allow this kind of level of engagement, where one can be able to just speak normal voice to actually engage with the different kind of resources. And this is quite useful, because increasingly we have seen that Google has actually made all these translators. We can be able to see Google in Zulu, Google in Xhosa, and so on. But then we want to be able to look at how we can be able to explore the different possibilities that are rendered by the Google Assistant. At the moment, that's one of the things that you're actually looking at, and I think it does render lots of possibilities. The other is this AirTag, which of course there has been quite an interesting thing that we are currently exploring the possibilities of what this would mean in education. Because currently we know that the AirTags are so limited to wanting to track different kind of things. Like, I mean, I've got an AirTag which I've put on my keys. I've got an AirTag which I've put in my wallet. I've got an AirTag which is in bags or luggage and something like this. And in fact, just about this morning, I tracked one of my AirTags, and I could see here that there is a case. There's a case here, just about. Amazingly, this is in England, because this is my daughter is just flying back from England, and she's got the AirTag in a case, and I saw that she was at the airport this morning. So you could actually see that the AirTag does have a little bit of potential. In fact, there are lots of potential there for what you can be able to do with this, and we are actually looking at what this would mean in education, and whether we could actually look at the possibility of using AirTags to just allow students come in a space, and we know the class attendance, or we can be able to just track where students are, particularly when they're doing field projects and things like that. So lots of possibilities there. I want to end with this African proverb. It says that when you show the moon to a child, it only sees your finger. And it's so very easy to want to think that you have successfully shown the child the moon, when actually the child has only been looking at your finger. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dick, for your wonderful presentation. You've talked about various elements of education innovation. You've started off with the Digital Literacy Index and how there could be a quadrant dividing different sections. Then you talked about what you're doing with the e-portfolio with your PGC students, which I thought was fascinating in terms of equipping them with digital literacy so that they're ready to teach with those skills when they're in the workforce, in the teaching workforce. Then you also talked about your digital games, which I find is a fascinating project. And then you've ended with different technological technologies that are available that we can think about as we're looking at education and research. Just a quick follow-up question. So you talked about how the PGC students are being equipped with different skills during their time as a PGC student, and they are going into the classroom. How can we ensure that the skills of teachers are progressing at the same rate as students? Sometimes we find that students seem to be ahead of us in terms of the game, in terms of technological advances. How do we ensure that teachers are equipped with similar skills?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think we need to be able to create and strengthen more professional learning communities, and I think that's what we need to be able to ensure we can build more and allow these pre-service teachers, when they go out there in the field, they should become members of the professional learning community. And I think in a professional learning community, which is, we would definitely allow the in-service teachers to learn from the pre-service teachers. The very experienced teachers, they do have a lot that they can teach the young teachers in terms of the pedagogy. They've got lots of experience in that regard. And the new teachers, they may know technology, and this is one of the things that we're really trying to get these our teachers to do, to equip them with the know-how on how they can be able to teach with technologies. But we know that they're still going to have to learn from those that have got the experience of being in the classroom. So we actually need to be able to create what we'd call very even non-judgmental, non-threatening learning spaces where in-service teachers and regardless of their levels of experience can be able to learn in a very relaxed way, in which case, and that's exactly what we're really trying to do with these pre-service teachers, and bring those, because obviously the experienced teachers, I think we need to be able to ensure that they can learn from the young teachers and vice versa.
Great. Thank you very much, Dick.
Sure, thank you.
We'll move on to our second presentation. So I'll read from Nora's online profile too. So Nora McIntyre currently works at the Southampton Education School, University of Southampton in the UK. As the school's educational innovation specialist, Nora asks how best to improve teacher effectiveness in educational technology among diverse global populations. She has a research interest in culture, socio-emotion, and inequalities. She particularly advocates the use of intensive data via innovative research technology and process-oriented analytic techniques. Over to you, Nora.
Hi everyone, I'm just trying to set up so that I can see everyone as I'd like to. Okay. All right. Great. So thanks, Lisa, for inviting me to this exciting workshop series and to today's webinar, which focuses on research methods for technological innovations. I'm just trying to hide this panel here in case it bothers other people. Right, there we go. Okay, so that's what I want people to see. So I'm very much focusing on research methods with educational technology in mind, and focusing on how, as technological innovations advance at a quick pace, how research methods can advance accordingly in order to appropriate the way technology is used and the way technology changes. So the framework I'll follow for kind of 4 examples and 4 areas of focus will be the way innovations in EdTech are, and I'll describe a characteristic, and so according to that characteristic, how research methods should be used. So the first characteristic about innovations in EdTech are that they are global, and so research methods should be contextually diverse. Um, and what does it mean for research to be contextually diverse? Well, there are kind of three broad ways in which we can think about this. They could be within study diversity. So within one study, we might focus on a collection or all of the low middle income countries, if we're thinking about innovations for international development. We could be contextually diverse in the way we conduct our studies across the life of our research. So between studies, we focus on various subsamples of low middle income countries. Also within studies, we could take the comparison design, which I do like to do, where we compare high income countries with low middle income countries so we can really get a grasp of what's unique of the various regions that we're trying to focus on, and so that we know what really is a unique characteristic or quality or need of, for example, low middle income countries if we're thinking about educational technology for international development. We could also compare multiple low middle income countries in terms of the cultural differences that can be found among across the global south. But today I'll focus on the approach of taking one study and having within one study the diversity of multiple countries. And the study I'll focus on is where we did a systematic review, me and colleagues in the EdTech Hub. We looked at how technology can be used for teacher professional development, and we actually focused on all low middle income countries that we could get our hands on. And you'll see that quite a lot of studies were included to begin with. About 5,000 studies had to be sifted through because we really wanted to get a grasp of the oversight of the field. And I'm just going to describe how we grappled with that approach of taking contextually diverse research methods to appropriate to the kind of life stage of educational innovation. We really thought that we should try and focus on all of the low middle income countries because it's educational technology and innovation through those is kind of really early on in the field, and we thought a systematic review should scope the field comprehensively in order for us to then know where to focus in terms of subsequent studies. You'll see here the inclusion criteria in our search strategy and what we meant by educators. It included informal context as well as formal. And our intervention for the systematic review was the use of tech for three broad criteria, which were teacher learning, teacher use, and or technology for student learning. We used an app called Colander to help sift through the studies that we included. If you are interested, Colander actually has an automated screening function and capability where it can recommend whether to include or exclude, and that could vastly increase the pace of your systematic review process, especially if it's a very big one like R1. Also, because it was such a because the review was focused on such a new area of the field, we needed to develop our own thematic framework for how to organize the studies in quite a broad and comprehensive and large scope of a systematic review. So we had a system of developing emerging codes where there would be a proponent. We had several rounds of people proposing new codes for our thematic framework of how to organize the various findings and qualities and characteristics of the studies. Colleagues would propose new codes. There would be several rounds of coding, and at the next subsequent round of coding all the studies, we would integrate the new proposed codes. And in total, I think we had about 6 rounds of coding all of the included studies, so that all of the included studies were thematically organized in a way that was meaningful and that encompassed the broad scope of the field. In the end, we ended up with all these codes that we applied to in order to organize the many studies that we found and that were relevant to our research question. And the findings looked something like this, where there were macro level, meso level, and micro level considerations to be taken for teacher professional development through EdTech and with use of EdTech. Another quality about innovations in EdTech is that they are intensive, and so research methods should capture the kind of high rate of change from moment to moment when teachers or students are using innovations in EdTech. Educational technologies produce intensive data, by which I mean even within 1 second or 1 minute or 1 hour, there can be many samples taken from the same participant who may be a teacher, a learner, or a school leader. And so we need research technologies that actually can match the pace at which data is being sampled and recorded. And for this, I suggest that we use process tracing technologies. I suggest that we look carefully at log files that you can export from educational technologies. We can use an approach called eye tracking with Think Aloud, so supplementing 2 data streams in order to really unpack the processes that are going on when teachers or students are using educational technologies. Related to that, we could look at the physiology, because heart rate and skin conductance, those change similarly quickly as the moment-to-moment decisions and processes that are experienced by teachers or students when they use technology. And just briefly, I'll focus on one of those examples, which is when eye tracking was used with Think Aloud. So recently I compared what you can find out from videos that are used to stimulate participant think aloud. So I got teachers in a room and I showed them their own eye tracking video recorded from when they were teaching, and I used that as a way of looking at of finding out how teachers think and operate in the classroom, and that can involve the use of tech as well. And there are insights from the study that can relate to how to use videos for teacher professional development. So you'll see in this video, when I play it, that there will be the sound of the teacher talking when she was teaching, and also the sound of the teacher talking when she's explaining what's going on in the classroom. You'll see red dots floating around the screen. That's where the teacher was looking at the time when the video was being recorded and the teacher was doing the teaching. And I've made the video picture high contrast so as to preserve confidentiality of the students involved who are recorded by this eye tracker. But this kind of research technology data would look like this.
Right, that's me just trying to get to the front of the room to get started. And I'm trying to make sure that they're cooperating during the lesson and the last few people are coming in. I couldn't work out why Jack was moving and then I realised he hadn't got a chair. Right. And I'm trying to settle Meg down there. Right.
So you can see that the moment-to-moment changes are captured by the eye movements and the video recording. It all can be coded and reflect the intensive way in which pace at which decisions are made and actions are taken. And the teacher herself is able to explain what she was thinking from moment to moment if you supplement the eye tracking data with Think Aloud. And in this study, I adapted a qualitatively developed framework for teacher cognition with a focus on expert teachers, and I adapted it to perform a cross-study comparison so that I could find out when to use which methodological approach when asking differing research questions. You'll see that there are different merges. There were unmerged codes that were applied to raw data, then those underwent a mid-merge, and then finally they underwent a full merge, and the full merged codes were subjected to quantitative analyses so that there could be a macro level comparison between 2 countries and 2 studies. And just briefly, what we found is that expert teachers typically think differently in terms of they report differently what they think and consider at the time of their teaching. And in particular, the greatest difference between the expert and the novice is that the expert teacher talks and thinks a lot more, reports thinking a lot more about classroom relationships, whereas the novice teacher reports thinking a lot more about disruptive behavior and kind of behavior level concerns. In terms of for research methods and recommendations going forward, it seems that when the teacher is wearing their own eye tracking glasses to track their own eye movements and then thinking aloud in response to that video, you get a lot more insight into classroom relationships, whereas you get a lot more insight into all the other kinds of cognitions if you're trying to find out about all the other aspects of teacher cognition by showing a teacher someone else's teaching and then asking them to think aloud in response to that. So another area of innovations in EdTech is that they are media rich, and so I suggest that research methods might also try and employ media rich avenues, techniques. So educational technologies are usually very multimedia in nature, and these are just some examples here in the screen, including clickstream and messaging and the learning exercises. And then as Dick was talking about how there's an Internet of Things, you can be in this Apple ecosystem, and then you're in this Apple Internet of Things where you're tracked in all sorts of levels for and it's really the various things that can be tracked is extremely multimedia in nature when you start taking a whole ecosystem or Internet of Things approach to looking at educational technology. And one media-rich project that I've been involved with looked at student collaboration with the use of an EdTech tool called GeoGebra. And it was focused on eye tracking and physiological tracking and electronic pen for implementing the GeoGebra problem exercise. And here's just another photo of the multimedia, the kind of media-rich setup of not only the learning resource that was in focus, but also of the whole research project. So in terms of classroom data collection, first we would set up the eye trackers, and we would complete as students tell students how questionnaires are to be completed. Once the lesson starts, the teacher was asked to present the kind of the problem in focus that we'd like them to focus to present so that we could collect the relevant data. And then there were, for the rest of the lesson, there was group work with all this research technology, multimedia research technology, recording multimedia data of the student collaborating at the same time as using the educational innovation of GeoGebra. In terms of the coding of the gaze in particular, of the eye tracking data, these were the codes that we analyzed, that we coded manually and then analyzed. We analyzed the gaze in terms of the durations per visit, so you need to relativize the durations, the total durations, according to the number of instances of eye movements that were recorded. We used this questionnaire mentioned here, so that in total there were 14 variables subjected to multivariate regression analysis. And ultimately, we found that students who are higher in anxiety tend to look at the collaborators' bodies more, which suggests to me that anxious students are monitoring their classroom environment more vigilantly than students with less or no anxiety. And finally, as a last example, innovations in EdTech are often online, and so research methods might adapt to that and respond to that by being remote or being revised appropriately for how data is analyzed. So online learning is innovation. It is assumed to increase access to education. So how should research on online learning be conducted? One way that can be done is by remote data collection. For example, instead of tracking eye movements or student behavior in a classroom now, you need to find ways to track student eye movements or behaviors remotely. And so kind of this natural experiment or natural observation approach needs to be taken in order to really appropriate the home-based environment that online learning takes place in. Also, other than looking at the kind of moment-to-moment human behavior, there are a lot of technological interactions that can be tracked through the use of data analytics. And when you start talking about data analytics, then you might need to adapt inferential stats or conventional statistics to the high dimensionality of the data. So you can't just run regression or standard stats that you might multi-level modeling in the way that you might do. And there are some nice papers recently on how to appropriate the big nature of the data that comes out of data analytics. There's also alternative non-inferential approaches to stats with big data, such as you taking the Bayesian or machine learning approach. And I'm going to give an example where this is done. In particular, I take the human in the loop approach to machine learning analyses, and I'll focus on the one that is particularly appropriate to the idea of innovation, because it's about educational access to online learning. The reason why human in the loop machine learning analyses are appropriate is because it can actually handle the high dimensionality of the data, although there is a paradigm shift when you take machine learning or Bayesian approaches, which traditional statisticians and psychologists need to kind of accustomize themselves to. You need to be happy to take more of a bottom-up approach, where model development and optimization is viewed as a way of finding the best way to explain a model rather than p-hacking or cheating. So you have to shift in terms of the way you view the role of each model that you develop. As you develop the models, in order to best explain the data that you've got, you need to view humans as the end users of ed tech, and so human interpreters and human expertise should always be involved as you're developing your models for analyses. The online learning platform in focus is Wiz Education, and the initial number of data points you can see there is high. For that, I use Python, and I employed this approach to cleaning through the data, organizing it, and then developing the appropriate and the optimal model in order to explain the data. And once I found the final model, I then employed feature importance analysis, which I did feature by feature, and also I looked at the feature interactions. A simplified version of what I just showed is now on this screen. And basically, you'll see that by using only the theory to develop a model, the model fit, the training adjusted R-squared and the test adjusted R-squared is not good. But once you use a data/algorithm-led approach to developing your model, the fit is much better. So when I employ both theory and data-led model development, I ended up finding that country is important when thinking about access to online learning, especially when you look at whether a country is low middle income country. The access is significantly lower than if you are a high income country. In terms of interactions, there was a cultural effect on educational access, especially as learning difficulty increased. Gender was important, where girls' access to online learning decreased with time taken to produce, to undergo the lesson, and that's often related to the girls' home and responsibilities. COVID had an impact to how much access to online learning students had, and age also interacted with the role of COVID. So educational innovations in EdTech should be global, intensive, media-rich, and online, and research methods should appropriate those qualities. Thank you. I'm sorry it took a little bit longer.
Great. Thank you, Nora, for your very detailed presentation about various research methods and how different innovations in technology can be helpful in addressing these questions. So you talked about innovations in educational technology being global, intensive, media-rich, and online. And you used various examples from your eye tracking data and your systematic reviews and others to demonstrate that. A quick follow-up question would be, so you talked about how different technological innovations can have affordances in answering certain research questions. What were your experiences of what kind of research methodologies may be best to answer certain research questions?
Okay, I guess if you think of a research question, then you might need to consider the life stage of that research question. And so the systematic review, for example, we thought looking at teacher professional development through EdTech or with use involvement of EdTech, it's never really been reviewed properly systematically before. And even in the field study by study, it's all very early stage still, especially in low middle income countries where EdTech is still needing to scale sustainably. And so because it was such an early stage, we wanted to keep the scope broad, and we adopted quite a qualitative approach to the whole design. Whereas if a research question is later in the stage in the life cycle, then we might take a more macro level approach, and also kind of focusing in on the number of variables, kind of reducing the number of variables that we might actually focus on, so that each variable is then more rigorously investigated and analyzed. So often kind of a more qualitative and open approach would be appropriate when it's kind of an early life stage for the research question, whereas a more quantitative, systematic approach might be more appropriate when a research question is quite mature in terms of how much it's been investigated and scaled.
Fabulous. Thank you, Nora. If I can bring Dick up onto the virtual stage with us, and we'll just address some of the questions that's been raised in the Q&A, and as well as other reflections and questions as well. So Dick, you talked about PGCE models, and also Nora's talked about the in-service teacher professional development and implications of the research in that. So maybe we can talk about implications on teacher practice and teacher development. So maybe starting off with the model of teacher education. So Dick, you talked about the PGCE model and the e-portfolio. What kind of content was in the PGCE that covers both learning and pedagogy, or is it more modeling the techniques? Can you tell us more about what is taught in the education technology modules?
Well, what is taught, first and foremost, is not so much about what is taught it's not like a course like that. The PGCE attend what we call digital sandpits, and in each of the sandpit sessions, they are exposed to a tool and they play with that, and they are shown how it was designed, and then they build it themselves, and they reflect on how they can teach with it. So, so that is what they do. So they go through that kind of a process. So they have looked at collaborative engagements. We have looked at the use of Google Docs as a collaborative writing spaces. We've looked at Google Slides. We have looked at, of course, we've actually used the Google Classroom as an overarching platform, as an overarching engagement space for them. And they have built the e-portfolio using the Google Sites. They have been exposed to Padlet. They have created things like that. There's always a pedagogical activity for which the use of the technology is just a tool to help them achieve that. And then they reflect on what they have just done, and then they reflect on how they can be able to teach with that. And that is what they do throughout the year. And each of those activities are documented on their individual portfolios. And so at the end of the year, they have a collection of this evidence of their own learning as their journey to becoming teachers. And that is what they do in the PGCE.
Great, thank you, Dick. That relates to the next question that I have for Nora. So Dick's just talked about all the kind of tools and apps that teachers pre-service teachers are being exposed to in the PGCE program. And I'm sure they get exposed to once they're working in the teaching profession as well. How do we, and I know that some of your work is about decision making and think aloud and eye tracking to monitor that. How do we, what do you see as the difference in the expert teachers in making those decisions in terms of using technology or using or their classroom practices?
Yeah, typically we've found just from the eye tracking research and with the Think Aloud, it's the way experts seem to be a lot better at being student-centered and experience-focused for the students rather than behavior-focused and kind of just managing disruptors. So in a way, experts are much more positive and future-looking, where I'm able to manage, sift through and filter through and cut through the disruption to almost prioritize the more important. Whereas novice teachers are maybe that they're distracted by disruptive behaviors in the moment. It may just be that they haven't become able to sift through the noise of the classroom yet, and they're just responding to the salient. The salient is quite a big eye tracking term, where you can't ignore what is salient in the room. Whereas the expert teachers maybe have been able to develop that ability to prioritize and to just action what is the most important.
And how are you defining expert teachers here?
Yes, I can see the Q&A here preempting you. So in our studies, the expertise is defined beyond experience. So we don't just think that teachers have taught longer tend to be better when they are better. But it's also social nomination. So it's a contextually sensitive way of defining expertise. Where they are nominated by school leaders and peers, they have more qualifications often, and when colleagues look at the teacher in the classroom, they will typically say that I would rate this as an excellent lesson or a good lesson, as opposed to one that is just satisfactory or less. So they often have higher scores when they are being assessed as well.
Great. We've just talked with you both, Dick and Nora, about focusing on teachers. Maybe we can look at ourselves as researchers. There's so many technological innovations out there, and we are engaging in educational research using technology. How do you keep up with learning about all the technological innovations that are out there, how to analyze them? And then maybe we can bring this to a bigger conversation about what we discussed in our first webinar was valuing research methods in education. How do we ensure that we grow a community of people who support each other in learning about these research methods? Dick, can I turn to you first and then Nora?
Well, I think it's always a question as to how do you learn about something that is in a continuous state of evolving. And I think it's all about how do you learn, how do you really place a finger on learning emerging technologies which are in a continuous state of emerging. And I think that's what the question is really. I think I'm not so sure whether I've got a single answer to that, other than ensuring that we've got more engagements and collaboration, and I think that's and being able to be comfortable to learn. I think researchers are learners. They are in a continuous state of really learning, and I think that's the only thing that I could be able to add. There's no magic bullet to doing that. And I think collaboration engagements would be the best way to go, I suppose.
Great,
what do you think?
you. Yeah. Thank you, Dick. And Nora, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think being interdisciplinary and collaborative is definitely the way forward, especially as a lot of tech involves other fields like colleagues in engineering, colleagues in computer science. The more you can collaborate and communicate with colleagues in other relevant fields, the better you'll be at kind of handling all the data that you come out with. But I also think that a lot of data that you end up with as technologies emerge can be similar to existing technologies. So, I can move from eye tracking data where it's not many participants, but it's a lot of data from one person, and then just move quite smoothly to looking at big data where there's quite a lot of data with quite a lot of people. And if you don't just focus on, the idea that I can only do gaze data, but think that you can handle kind of voluminous data, then you might realize the same approaches to voluminous data can be applied to data from lots of different technologies as they come out. So just kind of being versatile and realizing that there are a lot of transferable skills, even as technologies emerge and advance, and yeah, collaborating across the disciplines.
Wonderful. I think that's a very good way to end our webinar today. So thank you, Dick and Nora, for sharing with us your rich knowledge and insight into this topic of technological innovations in educational research. And we also thank the World University Network and its Research Development Fund for funding the ReMiE project, including this webinar. So thank you for joining us in the third and final webinar series of a 3-webinar series. And we hope the webinars have been helpful, and more information can be found on the project website as well as the recordings of the webinars. So thank you again.